Okay, and hello and welcome to week two, of course. And this particular lecture will not be all that long because basically what we're talking about today, what we're using this week for, is primarily working on your presentations and trying to put together what you're doing and getting ready for that exhibition, which we're going to do at the end of the semester. And so my hope is that you'll use most of this week to kind of do trial and error and what you're planning on doing. But I want to make sure that we give you everything necessary to finish the topic about the presentation itself and how you would prepare for it. So that's what we're going to be doing today. And so presentation preparation, presentation prep. And if we look at this, I wanted to make sure that we had covered the environment. Now, normally this is something that would be a completely different discussion because the environment has to do with where you're giving the presentation. And as it happens, we're not doing that, are we? We're not really giving these presentations in the environment that we would have liked to, which makes it all the more interesting. But that does give us the opportunity to talk about what you see behind me. Right now, that is the environment. Believe it or not, this little window of world is our environment. And so, for that, we have the ability to do at least some discussion about the environment. So, professionalism. Basically, you want to, let's see, a friend of mine had a way of saying this that I probably won't completely represent here, but he used to say, if you don't have to be professional, you can wear a torn T-shirt that has, something, some obscene slogan written on it or something like that. Nobody cares. But if you're a professional, you can't do that. Now, here's an interesting way of looking at this. Now, again, I'm trying not to go too far off topic, but it's funny. I remember when I went to get my senior pictures taken in high school. These are the pictures that were going to show up in the yearbook, and I would see people walking into the high school to get their senior picture taken, and they would have a suit on, but they'd be wearing shorts. They'd be wearing shorts. Why? Because the picture would never cover their upper half. And so, for that reason, they didn't have to wear the entire suit. They could wear whatever they want on the lower half of their body, which should not be seen. So we have a similar situation here. So all you got to do is cover what this window is, because that is all we will see when you give your presentation. But that doesn't mean you can't wear a tie, especially if it's appropriate to what you're doing. Now, I'm not saying you have to wear a tie, but that's something that you have to decide when you're looking at how you're carrying yourself. Make sure that you're dressed appropriately. Make sure that whatever we see in the background is not distracting. Since we're going to use Zoom, you could even use their backgrounds if you want to. That's basically what you're thinking about. But you want to be as ready as possible. You want to have what you need. Now, if you're doing this presentation in a regular venue, you would have to bring in everything. Now, I mean everything you could possibly need, all the handouts you're going to give. If you had something on the table that you were going to have, a demonstration, all that you would have to cover. In the context of this, you just have to make sure that you have everything that your audience has to see ready to show. And so, for example, if you're going to do your presentation, everything on the slide has to be there. If you're going to do something besides just the slides, you have to have that ready as well. You have to have that ready on another window on your computer that you can bring up. And most importantly, you have to have your notes memorized. Whatever it is that you need to say, you have to have that ready. All your material has to be ready. Don't assume anything. Don't assume that everybody in the audience can hear what you're saying or see you exactly as they're supposed to be. If you were talking about a venue, obviously you can't even guarantee that they have electricity. Even though that sounds incredibly stupid, it's not necessarily unheard of. So you may have to bring everything that you could expect for that particular venue, just in case they don't have it. I always have a bag of tricks. I always have adapters. I always have extra cords and things like that. One time when we were doing the mock trial, I managed to accidentally save the day because I had a VGA cord in my laptop briefcase. and they needed that. Without that, they wouldn't have been able to do their presentation. So occasionally, these wonderful things, come up. In a situation like this, unfortunately, and some of this is going to be beyond your control. It's not your fault if some of the people attending your presentation can't see it. But if for some reason there's something critical to your presentation, at least make reference to this point. I don't know if you can see this perfectly, but this is what I want you to see. Or you can provide an alternate way of seeing whatever it is. Control everything that you can. So everything within your presentation you must be able to control. Have it compartmentalized, packaged. Have it so that it's at your fingertips, literally. That is the most important thing that I can stress here. If you have something, if you have a video that you're showing, make sure that's on your local computer. Don't depend on YouTube. If for some reason you have lag time, that's not going to help. Have everything possible locally. Also, in the case of streaming video, I cannot guarantee that that will work in real time. So that's another thing. Maybe this is not the presentation to include elaborate video. Try to keep everything as bandwidth friendly as possible. And as I already said, dress appropriately. That's under professionalism. Design principles. I wanted to go over this quickly because these are nuggets of information that I got a long time ago at a presentation that I managed to hear while I was doing a job. Design principles. It sounds like an elaborate way of introducing this, but it is rather important. These are some very simple principles that I want you to keep in mind while you're designing your slides, while you're working on your slides, and while you're working on your presentation. The first thing is that the eye is not a camera. Now, basically what that means is that we see with our mind, not with our vision. Now, it may not seem intuitive all the time, but in fact it is. That you would say that the eye is a camera. It works like a camera. The retina behaves like film. The eyeball has basically a lens in it, and it's got the equivalent of film, and it's a little chamber. So it looks very much like a Brownie camera or like what the original cameras used to look like. But in fact, it doesn't really work. So, for example, if I were to back up here a little bit, let's say that you're looking straight ahead. You have what's called peripheral vision, so you can still see your hands if you do like this, but you couldn't read that way. If you were to hold a book or something, let's say I have a notepad in this hand, and I'm doing this, I can't see what's on that notepad. I may see that there is something on the notepad, but I can't read it unless I do this. So the idea is in the center of your vision, you have what's called the fovea. That's what you actually see, and that's generally right out there in front of you. And so that's a little bitty spot, and so that's why you move your eyes around. So you look over there, you look over there, and so if you enter a room that you haven't been in before, you look around and you get a sense for what is there, and your brain puts it all together. And so that, by the way, is how magic works. If you're a magician, basically you show your audience something, and then something else is going on back here that they're not looking at, and so they assume that nothing has changed in the background because they didn't notice it. And so then suddenly, somebody can come out from behind the magician. Oh, that person, how'd they just appear like that? So that's how magic works. And so the reason why it's important in the world of photography that the eye is not the camera is that you literally, when you're taking pictures, you have to look at everything that the camera sees because your eye will filter it out, the camera won't. And so as you're taking pictures, you have to understand that. And at the same time, when you're putting together a slide, understand that the person looking at it may not absorb all the details that are there because they are only going to be looking at certain parts of it. So you have to direct their attention. Okay, so going back to here. So the eye is not the camera. So the eye is not a camera. We judge a book by its cover. Now that principle has to do more with literally judgments. We judge a book by its cover. That goes back to presentation professionalism. So let me explain what that means. And this is not fair, by the way, because everybody is victimized by this. Let's say you are going to give your presentation. You've gone through all the trouble. You have it all set up and everything in advance. And you walk up to the stage and you trip over something and you fall over. Someone has to help you up. It's embarrassing. that gives your presentation kind of a rocky start. Or let's say something worse. Let's say there's technical difficulties. Let's say that it's taken you forever to get your presentation, set up on their equipment because their equipment is crappy. And even after all of that, people are still filing in and you're still getting it set up. Maybe you did everything you could. Maybe you only had an hour to get it set up. Too bad. Everybody looks at you like the bumbling, stumbling, unprofessional person. Or even worse, let's say something is your fault. Let's say you got a spelling error on your first slide. Then people are going to assume that you don't know how to spell. And even if everything about your presentation is correct, they're going to be judging based on what they see first. Okay, people judge it. We judge a book by its cover. Birds of a feather, this is a design principle, and I've already violated it. Because if you have various design principles that are close to each other, we assume they're related. Now, if we look at the bullet points here, the eye is not a camera. We judge a book by its cover. Those two are different, birds of a feather. We would say that suddenly, well, that's not really in the same ballpark here, but I've pretended that it is, because some of these principles apply to different things. And so, birds of a feather means that if you've got 2 points that are mentioned in the same place, we assume that somehow they're related. 2 design elements that are near each other, we expect them to somehow be related. Now, similarly, common fate, if we have 2 design elements that are pointing in one direction, we assume that they're pointing to the same thing, which may not always be true. Or if they're going right, we assume that means the same thing in the same context. Not always the case. Try not to confuse your audience. You may have something going this way, something else going that way in 2 different slides. Maybe that's confusing. Maybe you try to have everything that applies to growth going in the same direction, even though unemployment may be growth, but it's going down. Maybe you want to express that in such a way that common fate isn't working against you. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And so now in this particular case, I think we are working correctly. I have given you these principles in very short, concise little phrases here, and because that's the way they were given to me. These are the principles, and they're easy to remember for that reason. Do not try to write a novel on your slides. Try to avoid overfilling your slides because people simply aren't going to be able to absorb that much information at once. And you don't always, and also if you give them everything in slide notes, let's say you give them a whole packet of slide notes, have you ever actually read those? I'm going to bet that most of you haven't, and most professionals haven't. They're going to take the packet, and then they're basically going to drop it in the trash on their way out. They're not going to read it. Or if they want to read it, if they intend to read it, that doesn't mean they will either. They may take it home with them. They may actually put it in their luggage, fly home with it, have it on their desk, and then a year later they'll throw it out. And so the reason I'm telling you this is that try to make your points as memorable as possible, as concise as possible, because this may be your only opportunity to reach them. Simplify wherever possible. And that's simply my way of sort of capping all of this together. Try to keep everything simple and concise. And so that's how you want to put together your presentation. And you also want to try to fit it into as little space as you can. Remember, your presentation can be up to 15 minutes. It can be 10 minutes. It can be 7 minutes, whatever you feel that you need to get your point across. So that's what I want you to think about this week in terms of putting together your presentations and making all of this happen. And so this isn't technical. This is just what I want you to be getting ready for your slides. Send me a copy of what you have. I will give you as much feedback as I can. Use that to improve on it as you go along. Okay, thank you for your time and have a good week.